The voicemail was only 40 seconds long. I had been standing in the kitchen making coffee when my husband's phone lit up on the counter. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't that kind of wife. But the screen was face up, and the name on the notification was Rachel, my best friend since college, the woman who had been my maid of honor 3 years ago, and the preview text read last night was everything. When are you telling her? I set down my mug very carefully. The kind of careful you do when your hands are shaking and you don't want to break something. I picked up his phone. I read the full thread. I put it back exactly where I found it. Then I walked upstairs, sat on the edge of our bed, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The coffee went cold. Outside, I could hear the neighborhood waking up, a dog barking, a car reversing out of a driveway, someone's sprinklers clicking on. Everything normal. Everything completely, impossibly normal. My husband came downstairs 20 minutes later in his work shirt, tie already on, looking for his keys. He kissed the top of my head without slowing down. You okay? He asked. You look pale. I'm fine, I said. He grabbed his keys. He grabbed his phone. He left. I sat there until the sound of his car disappeared. Then I called my aunt. She answered on the first ring, like she always does, like she has some internal alarm that goes off when the women in our family need her. I didn't even say hello. I just said, Grandma's shop, is it still empty? A pause. Then her voice, steady and unsurprised, the way my aunt always sounded, like nothing in this world could genuinely shock her anymore. It's yours, baby. Has been since March. You know that. Can I go there? I'll have the keys ready in an hour. I packed one bag. I didn't leave a note. I didn't call him. I just drove north on the interstate with my hands at 10 and 2, and my jaw so tight my teeth ached, watching the flat Georgia suburbs slowly give way to rolling green hills, then to the kind of old-growth trees that didn't care about anyone's problems. Clover Falls, Vermont was 4 hours from everything I had ever known. My grandmother had moved there in her 60s, opened a small flower shop on a corner lot, and spent the last 20 years of her life arranging peonies and listening to people's troubles. I had visited a handful of times as a child. I remembered the smell of it more than anything: wet stems, cold water, something green and alive underneath everything. My aunt had driven up the week after the funeral to check on the building. The shop was structurally sound, she told me. Grandmother had owned the property outright, no mortgage, and it had come to me clean in the will. All I had to do was decide what I wanted to do with it. For 8 months, I had been too busy being a wife to decide anything at all. I pulled up in front of it just past noon. The sign above the door still said Hazel's Blooms in faded green paint, the H slightly crooked in a way I remembered from childhood. The display window was bare, dusty, a few dead leaves pressed against the inside of the glass, but the bones were good. Even standing on the sidewalk, I could see that. My aunt had taped the keys to the door in an envelope with my name on it and a note that said only, "This was always meant to be yours." Inside, it smelled exactly like I remembered, or like a ghost of it, the memory of water and flowers and earth, even with everything shut up and cold. The front room had a long wooden counter, a refrigerated display case that wasn't running, hooks along one wall where copper buckets hung in descending size. The back had a workroom with a wide table, a utility sink, shelves of dried and dusty supplies. A narrow staircase led to a small apartment above, where my grandmother had lived the last few years, when climbing stairs got harder. I stood in the middle of the workroom for a long time without moving. There was a hairpin on the work table. My grandmother's, curved and plain, the kind she wore every day. I picked it up and held it in my palm. It was such a small thing to be left behind. I cried then, finally. Not about my husband. About her. Then I dried my face, went upstairs, and made the bed with the quilt I found folded in the closet. It smelled like cedar and lavender. I pressed my face into it for one moment, breathing. That night, I called my husband. He answered, sounding guilty before I said a word, the way people do when they've been waiting for the axe to fall. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I told him I knew, I told him I was gone. I told him not to come after me. He said my name twice. Then he said, "Nora, it's not." I hung up. I slept for 11 hours. The town noticed me within the first 2 days. That's the thing about a place that size roughly 3,000 people, one main street, 2 churches, and a diner that had been run by the same family since 1978. A newcomer standing in front of an old closed shop with a broom and a look of grim determination was news. The woman at the hardware store, who introduced herself as Beverly and shook my hand so firmly I felt it in my elbow, tilted her head when I asked about cleaning supplies and trash bags. "You're Hazel's granddaughter," she said. It wasn't a question. "She talked about you." She paused, scanning my face with a directness I found oddly comforting. "You look like her around the eyes." I didn't know what to do with that, so I just said, "Thank you." On my way back, I passed a man loading lumber from a truck parked outside the building next to mine. He glanced over, nodded once. Maybe 30, dark work jacket, sawdust on his boots. "Hazel's place?" he asked. "Her granddaughter," I said, the same words Beverly had used. They felt strange in my mouth, like trying on something that didn't yet fit. He nodded again. "Good to have it open again. Town missed it." He went back to his lumber. I went back to my sweeping. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know much of anything yet. But that small sentence, "Town missed it," sat with me all afternoon like a warm hand on the shoulder. The first week, I mostly cleaned. I wasn't ready to think beyond that. I emptied the refrigeration case, scrubbed the counters, got the electricity and water fully running, dragged a decade's worth of accumulated supplies into some kind of order. My hands cracked from the cold water and the chemicals. I wore my grandmother's aprons, the ones hanging on the hook by the sink, and when I moved in them, I felt less alone than I had in years. My mother called every day. My husband called twice and then stopped. Rachel never called. I hadn't expected her to. On the 8th day, I drove to the library and got a library card and checked out every book they had on floral design. There were 4. I read all of them in a week, taking notes in the margins of a spiral notebook I bought at the pharmacy, underlining words I didn't understand and looking them up on my phone. But books only go so far. Beverly was the one who mentioned her name. I had stopped in for more sandpaper, and she mentioned, offhand, that if I was serious about reopening the shop, I ought to talk to a woman named Eleanor Cross. She used to supply Hazel, Beverly said. Grows on a farm just outside town. She's difficult, she added, in the flat Vermont way that means, this is information you need, not a warning to discourage you, but she knows flowers the way some people know scripture. I drove out the next morning. Eleanor Cross was 73 years old, small and rooted looking, with soil permanently under her fingernails and a way of standing in her greenhouse doorway that made it clear she was not the kind of person you visited without a reason. Her farm was 10 minutes from town, a modest stretch of land with 3 greenhouses and a cutting garden that was, even in early spring, more beautiful than anything I had seen in years. Rows of ranunculus, anemones, tulips just beginning to open. Cold weather crops of eucalyptus and dusty miller. The smell of damp earth and green things living. She looked at me the way a teacher looks at a student before they've decided whether to take them on. Hazel's girl, she said. Her granddaughter, Nora. I hesitated. I want to reopen the shop. I don't really know what I'm doing. She said Beverly said you might be willing to teach me. Eleanor didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stepped back from the doorway. You'd better come in, then. She was not gentle about it. That first week, I did nothing but learn to condition stems the right cut, the right depth of water, which flowers drank fast and which liked to rest. She talked constantly while she worked, not at me but alongside me, narrating decades of accumulated knowledge in a tone that expected me to keep up. I made every mistake available. I cut too shallow. I bruised the stems handling them wrong. I put lilies next to daffodils without realizing the sap was toxic to the other flowers. She pointed each mistake out once and moved on. You're thinking about it too much, she said, watching me struggle with a Dutch spiral arrangement one afternoon. Isn't thinking how you learn? Thinking gets you started, feeling gets you there. She stepped beside me, repositioned my hands on the stems. You're trying to force it into what you want it to be. Let it show you what it wants to become. I wasn't sure if she was talking about flowers. That evening, I drove back to the shop and stood at the workroom table for an hour, just arranging stems the way she had shown me, without looking at the photographs in my notebook, just by feel. The proportions were wrong. The color balance was off. But something in the rhythm of it, the repetition, the physical attention it required, quieted something in me that had been loud for weeks. I left the arrangement on the counter and went upstairs and slept without dreaming. 2 weeks later, I placed my first wholesale order from Eleanor's farm. I put 3 small arrangements in the front window. Beverly told the diner owner. The diner owner came in, looked at what I had, and asked if I could do a standing weekly order for their tables. I said yes, before I thought about whether I was ready. A retired teacher came in, looking for something for her daughter's birthday. A teenager bought a single stem of ranunculus and blushed when I didn't ask why. Small things. But they were mine. The man with the lumber, his name was Caleb, I learned from Beverly, who knew everything, was renovating the space next door into a bookshop. He was usually there when I opened in the morning, usually still there when I locked up. We developed a kind of sidewalk rapport, the way neighbors do, brief and comfortable. He asked once, in early April, how it was going with the shop. I said, honestly, that I had no idea what I was doing. He laughed. It was a real laugh, not polite. Neither did I when I started my first job, he said. Tore out an entire load-bearing wall by mistake. Is that supposed to be reassuring? The building's still standing, he said. So probably yes. I thought about that later. Something in the way he said it, matter of fact, not performing, had the same quality as Eleanor's instruction. Just information. No inflation, no condescension. My husband found me on a Thursday afternoon in late April. I was in the back room processing a delivery when I heard the bell above the front door and came out with wet hands and a cutting knife, and there he was. He looked thinner, tired in the way that comes from guilt rather than work. He was wearing the gray sweater I had given him for Christmas, which felt like a strange choice, or maybe not a choice at all. Hey, he said. I set down the knife and dried my hands on my apron. Daniel. He looked around the shop, the window arrangements, the refrigerated case now running and full, the copper buckets of stems lining the walls. Something moved across his face that I didn't have a name for. I've been calling, he said. I know. You didn't pick up. I know that too. He put his hands in his pockets, a gesture I recognized as nervousness from years of standing beside him in uncomfortable situations. His birthday dinners with his father, job interviews. Any moment that required him to hold still and be accountable. I drove 4 hours, he said, like that was an argument. I didn't ask you to. He looked at me then, really looked. Nora. I made a terrible mistake. I know that. Rachel, it was. It didn't mean anything, it was the worst thing I've ever done, and I have spent every day since. Stop, my voice was even. I wasn't performing calm, I actually felt it, the way a door feels solid when it's been well hung. I'm not angry at you anymore. I don't have the energy to be angry, but I need you to hear what I'm saying. What you did wasn't a mistake like a wrong turn, it was a choice. You made it every day for however long it was going on, and you would have kept making it if I hadn't found out. He opened his mouth. I kept going. I'm not coming back. Not because I can't forgive, but because I've spent the last 2 months building something real, and I realized in the process that what we had wasn't. I was so focused on being a good wife that I stopped noticing I wasn't happy. I looked at him, this man I had loved, this man I had organized my life around. I think you weren't either. I think we both wanted something neither of us knew how to ask for. He was quiet for a long moment, then, in a smaller voice. So that's it. That's it. He left, without asking again. I watched his car pull onto the street and disappear around the corner, and I waited for the wave of grief, the collapse. What came instead was something quieter. A loosening. Like setting down a bag I had been carrying so long I forgot it was heavy. I went back to the workroom. I finished processing the delivery. By May, the shop was open 4 days a week. I had 5 regular wholesale accounts, the diner, 2 of the bed and breakfasts on the main road, a small hotel 40 minutes away that Caleb had connected me with after mentioning it in passing one morning. I hadn't asked him to. He had just said, the place has been looking for a local supplier since the one they had closed last year. I mentioned your name, here's the contact. He slid a business card across the sidewalk between us without ceremony. I called the number. I got the account. Eleanor's farm became my second home. Some mornings, she let me work in the cutting garden before we went inside, the 2 of us quiet in the early light while the mist was still in the low places. She talked about my grandmother sometimes. Small things, the way Hazel had a specific preference for coral over orange, how she had once driven 2 hours in a snowstorm to deliver a funeral arrangement because she said flowers for the dead mattered as much as flowers for the living. She was stubborn, Eleanor said one morning, not unkindly. I know. I smiled. I'm starting to think it runs in the family. She looked at me with something that might have been approval. Good. Flowers, grown soft, don't last. One afternoon in early June, Caleb came into the shop for the first time. He stood just inside the doorway, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the arrangements in the display case with a focused attention I hadn't expected. For my sister, he said, her birthday next week. I don't know what I'm doing. What does she like? Color, he said. Loud color, she's not subtle. I put together something with dahlias and snapdragons and a spray of bright orange calendula that was a little wild and not technically conservative. He looked at it for a moment when I set it on the counter. Then, yeah, that's her. He paid and turned to go, then stopped. Hey, he said, you're doing good here. The shop looks like it's been here forever. It has been here forever, I said. He almost smiled. You know what I mean. I did. He meant it looked inhabited. Like it had a person in it again. After he left, I stood at the counter for a moment. Then I went back to work. By August, I had hired a part-time helper, a girl from the local college who was studying environmental science and handled the deliveries on Saturdays with a cargo bike she had rigged herself. My grandmother would have loved her. I was baking close to 60 arrangements a week. Not baking, designing, processing, arranging, delivering. The vocabulary of it had become mine without my noticing. I knew which varieties wilted fast in heat and which lasted 10 days in a cool room. I knew which customers wanted structure and which ones wanted wild. I knew the smell of the shop at 6 a.m. When I came down before the town was moving, that specific cold green quiet that felt like something sacred. My mother drove up in July. She stood in the front room and looked around and then looked at me for a long moment, and her eyes were wet. Your grandmother would have she started, then stopped. I know, I said. She stayed for 5 days. She rearranged the apartment upstairs the way mothers do. She found my grandmother's recipe box and made soup. When she left, she hugged me at the door for a long time and said, quietly, I think you were lost for a while. I'm glad you found your way back. I didn't say anything. I just held on. Caleb and I had started having coffee sometimes not planned, just the overlapping of schedules, him with a cup from the diner, me with mine from upstairs, both of us outside on the sidewalk in the 10 minutes before the day got loud. We talked about the buildings on the street, which ones had good bones and which had been cheaply fixed. We talked about the town and its rhythms. He had grown up here, left for 8 years to work in Boston, come back when his father got sick. He had stayed because he found he didn't miss the city the way he thought he would. Do you regret it? I asked once. Coming back. He thought about it genuinely, not performing consideration. No. I think I needed to leave to know what I was coming back to. I understood that more than I knew how to say. One evening, in late September, Eleanor came by the shop in the late afternoon, unusual for her. She rarely left the farm after 3. She looked around the room with that ledger-reading gaze of hers, then nodded once, as if confirming something she had already decided. You've built something real, she said. I learned from the best. She waved that off, same as she always did when I said it. I showed you technique. What you built is yours. She picked up a stem of dried strawflower from the counter, turned it in her fingers. That man, who comes by in the mornings. I kept my expression neutral. Caleb. He looks at you the way decent men look at things, they're not sure they have the right to want. Eleanor. I'm 73, she said. I've earned the right to say obvious things. After she left, I stood in the shop in the last of the day's light, thinking about that, about what it meant to recognize the shape of something before you were ready to name it. That evening, Caleb helped me carry a large order of overwintering bulbs from my car. We worked in companionable quiet, stacking the paper bags in the back room. When we finished, he leaned in the doorframe, and I made tea because there was nothing else to do with my hands. We sat at the workroom table and talked until the streetlights came on outside. He told me about his father, the illness, the slow kind, the one that teaches you patience whether you want it or not. I told him about my grandmother, about coming here and finding the hairpin on the table, about the smell of cedar and lavender in the quilt. She left you the right thing, he said. She always knew what people needed, I said. Better than they did. He looked at me for a moment. Then, carefully, the kind of carefulness that isn't timid, just deliberate, he reached across the table and rested his hand over mine. I didn't pull back. The shop was quiet around us, the stems cooling in their buckets, the smell of late-season dahlias in the air. I don't want to rush anything, he said. I just wanted you to know. I know, I said. I wanted you to know that I know. He smiled. It was the real kind. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the shop for a while in the dark, not turning on the lights, just sitting with the quiet. Then I opened my notebook, not the recipe one, the other one, the one I'd started writing in a few weeks after I arrived, and I wrote something down. I wrote. Daniel left and I thought he took something essential with him. He didn't. The essential things weren't his to take. What he took was the story I had been telling myself about who I was and what I needed. Turns out that story was too small for me anyway. I wrote, I came here to hide and stayed because I started building. There's a difference, I'm learning to feel it. I wrote, Grandmother, I think I understand now why you stayed. Some places hold you because they need you as much as you need them. This one needed someone to come back. I'm glad it was me. Outside, Clover Falls settled into its nighttime sounds, a dog somewhere, a truck on the highway above town, the wind moving through the maples that line the street. The refrigeration case hummed. The copper buckets sat in their row. The shop smelled like water and green things and the specific aliveness of flowers that are still drinking. My name is Nora Callahan. I am 31 years old and I own a flower shop in a small Vermont town that my grandmother loved. I didn't plan for any of it. I drove north with one bag and a hairpin I didn't know I was looking for. Some seasons strip you bare. Not to destroy you, to clear the ground. Whatever grows next, grows honest. I know how to tend it now.